On a day where the Mavericks news could not keep coming, the Dallas Mavericks will continue to make news. And we got a newsmaker with us, Jake Fischer from Bleacher Report. We'll get into him, talk to him about Donnie Nelson, Kristaps Porzingis, Rick Carlisle to the Bucks, ? Masai Ujiri with the Mavericks. Who knows what's coming up? We'll talk about it all on today's Locked On Mavs.
It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Luka Doncic, and this is Locked On Mavericks podcast.
Dallas Mavericks are NBA champions. Bang! Bang! It's good! And the Mavericks have won the game!
If you don't believe, you shouldn't be here.
And welcome. You are locked on to the Dallas Mavericks. My name is Nick Angstadt, media member and coordinator for the Locked On Podcast Network. And joining me, as always, my co-host, contributor at Mavs.com, the Donnie Nelson nerd, the One More Thing King. What you got for me, Isaac Harris?
Oh, man, it's not about what I have. We are so excited to have Jake Fischer join us on the pod. Whether it's reporting news for Bleacher Report, he just put out a brand new book called Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Has Changed the League. But this is also like a crazy day. Like Donnie Nelson's out for the Mavericks. So what a time for Jake to join us.
Yeah, absolutely crazy time. Jake, thanks so much for joining us. By the way, today's episode is brought to you by Michelob Ultra. 2.6 carbs, 95 calories. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. Stay tuned for the Ultra Moment segment coming up later, and I'm sure we have one. I think that'll bring us enjoyment, I guess. Brought some people enjoyment today. All right, Jake Fischer, like Isaac said, Bleacher Report, the new book is Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. Jake Fischer, has the league changed forever today also? Like, it just seems like every day there's a new, league-wide changing thing.
You know, for a while, talking to people around the league, there was one executive that I text with and talked to on the phone pretty regularly who kept saying, you know, everything is happening, but nothing is happening. And everything finally bubbled to the surface today. There was definitely talks about Stan Van potentially being out in New Orleans for a while. The Scott Brooks thing, you know, people were wondering whether that was going to get finalized. Obviously, Kawhi and, Chris Paul's injuries, no one expected that, but even Donnie Nelson leaving, I didn't expect him to get, mutually part ways today, but there's definitely been talk about that power struggle that Tim Cato at The Athletic, brought to light earlier this week for months, dating back to the trade deadline. So that wasn't entirely, shocking either, even though the timing was.
Jake, could you shed more light on that situation? I know we had Cato who wrote the piece, earlier in the week, but yeah, just like, I know you just said that you've been hearing it for months. Like who have you, like, what have you heard about Reliably and just the Mavs front office just over these past few months? You reported, we're going to talk about later on about Porzingis stuff and Rick stuff recently, but yeah, just what have you heard about that situation?
Back around the trade deadline, talking to executives from other teams, there definitely started to be a theme of, we don't really know who's calling the shots in Dallas right now. Is it Donnie? Is it Reliably? Michael Finley's name has even been brought up a lot as, like, is he gaining a little bit more power now internally? Again, this is all just what people are speculating and talking about. But when everyone is starting to say that, that's when your ears start to perk up. And that's when, someone like Tim, who actually is more connected with that team, obviously, than most, can actually go and find out more details. But definitely have heard widespread that there's a rift between Luka and Reliably. Obviously, that was the centerpiece of Tim's story. I was told that Rick was the driving force to push for Reliably not to be with the team anymore on the road, as Tim reported. But I think he left that detail out, that it was a Carlisle decision to try to force that. I think that was partially due to Rick trying to do what he can to, alleviate the tensions that are clearly existing elsewhere in that franchise too. There's obviously, as Tim wrote, and there was some expectations that Carlisle might not return this year, being that just for what it is, forget about the rumors. They haven't advanced past the first round since 2011. So at a certain point, while on one hand, and as Cuban came out very staunch in support of Rick, like, there's a long-standing belief that he's the guy there until he's not. But, like, maybe he will be at a certain point. So there's been a lot of speculation about turmoil within that franchise kind of stemming around Luka for a couple months now.
It's really interesting. We heard conflicting reports, from I think Mark Spears had a report, Woj had another report, which is hilarious because that's on the same network of like Luka cared about Donnie Nelson leaving. Luka doesn't care about Donnie Nelson leaving, and it'll just continue. And it seems like that relationship is set in stone. But what are your thoughts just on Haralabah getting so much power all of a sudden now? Donnie Nelson, who's been a staple in this franchise from the outside, kind of looking in. What are your thoughts on the power struggle, all of that, and seeing now where this franchise is? This is a pivotal offseason for the Mavericks with Luka, and what is Porzingis going to be and all that?
One thing I will say, and I don't want to speak to the sourcing of the story necessarily, but I mean, just talking to people in the league today, there's a very big consideration amongst people in the league. I'm not saying this is true, but people definitely in the league think that Donnie Nelson leaked all that material to Tim. And I think that's probably the case with Cuban and Bob too. They probably think it as well. So, I mean, I really do, not to give Tim too much credit, but I really do think that story played a huge factor in expediting this. But I also think we were heading down this direction anyway. I mean, look at, not to be too much of a shill, but look at my book where Stan Hinkie didn't get fired in Philadelphia, but they were for months trying to bring in the concept of a co-GM and a shared power structure, which never works in this NBA. That would be virtually unheard of, to have two people have pretty much equal say at the top of a franchise. So they pushed him out. I'm not saying that Dallas was actively doing that, but the way this situation was structuring and was progressing, I think the writing was on the wall for Donnie at a certain point. Maybe wasn't coming this week, but it seemed like he was losing his grasp on his agency at the top of that decision tree.
So when you reported the KP stuff around the trade deadline, even obviously nothing happened. He's still on the team. We've seen how it played out in the playoffs. Now with a kind of a question mark of who really is making the decisions this offseason, factor in that, but also what happened, the reports at the trade deadline that you made. What do you see as the future for KP? Like, is he still on the market? Is that what you're hearing around the league? Do you expect him to be on the Mavericks next year?
I think, what I reported was something that the Mavericks obviously didn't want to come out publicly. And I think that's a big theme between that story and Tim's story, that Cuban went on the record pretty quickly saying that this was false. And, talk to anybody around the league, I mean, multiple teams. The Mavericks called them, gauging interest on Kristaps. And I think, obviously that creates news. That's why I wrote it, being that anytime a team is willing to trade a 25-year-old, they're not willing to trade, but at least open to listening to offers and have discussions on a 25-year-old former All-Star who they gave up multiple first-round picks with to be the running mate to a generational player, that's news. So, I mean, I think also, and not in hindsight, just in general, also you got to give credit to that whatever is happening in Dallas front office to actually have the guts to do that, being that a big criticism that a lot of executives around the league end up getting is holding on to their guys too much and overvaluing their guys and not willing to discuss. Like, at the end of the day, Kristaps is not the same player pre that meniscus injury in the bubble. And any smart, frugal, pragmatic front office, they're not doing their job if they're not poking their ear out there and seeing what they could get back for someone who was playing beneath their expectations. Maybe another team values this guy more than you do and you can get something back. Where they go from here, I don't know, being that bloated contract has 3 years left or whatever it is. It's multiple years. And it's going to be difficult for the same reasons they want to trade him. It's going to be difficult for getting a buyer interested in taking him on. I think one idea I pitched around this week to a bunch of executives is some type of situation with OKC with Al Horford. That seems to be a pretty clean opportunity, and it would be the type of guy that, could at least bring some type of stability defensively on the inside. I'm not saying he's the answer, but it's at least like a contract that matches up similarly with Porzingis' value, who probably could play a role. And he's obviously getting older, but he didn't play half this year, so he's probably got some miles left on those legs. And again, I'm not reporting saying that they've had conversations with Al Horford, but I think that's the type of situation that you could see Kristaps leave. A move that isn't necessarily like a grand slam home run for Dallas, but one that they wipe their hands clean. They do kind of get someone back who can contribute at a similar capacity this season. And they probably even have to attach a pick to get rid of his deal at this point also, too.
Man, to have Al Horford have just the sentence you just said of how Al Horford bring back similar production to Kristaps Porzingis is just wild to think of where we've been again with Kristaps Porzingis. But let's go to our Michelob Ultra moment of the week. I think it's got to be Donnie Nelson. I don't know if it brings joy or excitement for the fan base, but it is the biggest moment of the week so far. Donnie Nelson and the Dallas Mavericks parting ways. That is our Michelob Ultra moment of the week. Let's go back to that moment. What are you hearing from people? You said you talked to a bunch of people around the league. What are their thoughts about the Mavericks right now, like the state of the franchise now with Donnie Nelson, who's been with the franchise longer than Cuban? Like he started in 98 with the franchise. Cuban bought the team in 2000. Like, what are people saying about the Dallas Mavericks? Is it like, oh my gosh, here goes Cuban and the joke of a Mavericks going again? Like, what are the thoughts or I guess the vibes around the league right now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they made a big show of announcing or letting Mark Stein and Tim McMahon in on they're hiring the search firm, but there's a lot of thought from people I've talked to. Who's going to want that job? Who's going to want to take the job that, I mean, look how it ended for Donnie Nelson. That's potentially an ending for them too. So I'm curious where that can actually go. Like who can actually be someone to take in that spot? Do they just promote someone internally? Do they bring on someone who, is looking for an opportunity that is willing to do that? I mean, these types of concessions happen all the time, and there's all these speculations and rumors. Pretty much any time an executive or a coach gets hired, there's usually some condition that they agreed to that another guy wouldn't, typically. So maybe they are looking to find someone who. And by those conditions, I mean, sometimes like that's, the equipment staff, like they're our guy, like he can't go anywhere, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
But sometimes that ranges to Reliably is going to be very involved. Like that's a situation where, sometimes a GM gets hired, but the owner says, but you got to hire this guy to be your assistant GM too. And that's a perilous situation. So that's the one big thing I've heard come back this week so far is, if they are going to hire somebody and not just give the whole keys to Reliably, who is willing to come into a situation where there is a quote-unquote shadow GM already sitting there in place?
You said giving the keys to Reliably sent chills up my spine. I'm not sure I'm ready for that whole situation. There you go. That's the Michelob Ultra moment of the week. I guess it brought joy, happiness, and enjoyment to some people. There's a lot of people in the Mavs fan base that wanted Donnie Nelson to be gone. So this moment is only for you guys. It's only worth it if you enjoy it. 2.6 carbs, 95 calories. Michelob Ultra, go get you some today. All right, Isaac Harris, we are joined by Jake Fischer, Bleacher Report. Again, the book is Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. Let's focus on, so we've been talking about Donnie Nelson, Kristaps Porzingis a little bit, and then now let's shift over to Rick Carlisle. So you reported a little while ago that, quote, Mavericks head coach Rick Carlisle is another long-term coach who's been rumored to have an eye on Milwaukee's potential opening. It seems like after Kevin Durant's insane Game 5, it seems like the nail has been drove into the coffin for Coach Bud up with the Milwaukee Bucks. What are your thoughts on Rick Carlisle, the Bucks, where they stand now, especially now that Donnie Nelson is out with the Mavericks?
Yeah, I mean, as Tim wrote in The Athletic, there's been talk for a while that there's tension between Rick and Luka, and as much as he's been Cuban's guy long term here, like we said, they haven't made it out of the first round since 2011. At a certain point, even the greatest coach in franchise history, at a certain point you got to get held accountable. I mean, we see it in college all the time. We see it in great certain point, just really got to the level of success that you'd like. So I think it makes sense that, and I do think that with everything in that franchise, like it's only smart for someone like Rick to keep an eye out for the future. And this is a pretty tenuous situation, being that the Bucks job is not open yet and Rick is employed by Dallas, but there's been
the head of the Coaches Association.
Exactly. And but this stuff happens all the time. Like there's been speculation about Chauncey Billups being Terry Stotts' replacement in Portland for a year. Like at the end of the day, the NBA is a business and an ecosystem, and everyone in it is an independent actor, and they all have their own agenda in play. And you hope that as a franchise, your head coach and your front office and your players' agendas all line up at the same time when you win a title. But pretty typically, it's not how it works out. So I think it's only fair for a head coach who knows the superstar, doesn't necessarily love working with him, and is very, very close to Jamal Mosley. It only makes sense that that guy would start to look elsewhere and see, try to read the tea leaves and what opportunity could be open for him if that change were to happen.
I know we're about to shift solely to your book, which I'm fascinated with your book, by the way. The idea of tanking, and we have argued on this podcast for so long.
Our first 2 years were the 2 years that the Mavs tanked, so of this podcast. So
of this, pro tanking and just all this stuff, and the effect of tanking on like young players, their development in the league and everything. But real quick, my last question to you is, and if it's nothing, then no big deal. Is there anything else around the Mavericks that you're hearing right now outside of Rick in Milwaukee, outside of the front office, just moving into this offseason, whether it's a player out there that they could be interested in free agency, whether it's something with their own roster, just a broad open question, anything else about the Mavs?
I think there's expectation that they're going to try to make a play in the front court. I mean, that's been, I think, part of the conversation with Kristaps too. They were linked to John Collins for a while, and there's some Rashawn Holmes talk. I think their priority is going to be to try to re-sign Tim Hardaway. But from there, I think they also have some cap space to play and try to make a move at someone who can really solidify the front court and be a partner for Luka there. But they also need to improve this roster. That's like the expectation, I think, from everyone around the league, that they're going to try to make moves on the margins and improve. And obviously, the Josh Richardson deal didn't work out. Like they need to really supply Luka with a sufficient supporting cast. That there's a lot of question marks on who will actually be back on that team next year.
It's wild that now we're in a spot where you have Luka Doncic, top 5 player in the NBA. He's 22 years old, and all of a sudden the GM or the president of basketball operations doesn't want to be there anymore. The coach is looking at other jobs. Like, it's just so wild to me, Isaac, that that all of a sudden this franchise is in this spot. I'm curious what both of you guys think about the state of the Mavericks, and how will they have to overcome Mark Cuban, or they have to overcome some of this dysfunction, and how wild it is that they have Luka and yet it still is this spot.
I don't think it's necessarily that wild that this is happening while they have Luka. I think that it's a chicken and egg type situation, right? Where you have this superstar, this generational superstar. By all accounts, everyone across the board agrees, right? There's no one who's down in Luka Doncic. So I think that puts the pressure on everybody involved to maximize him right away. And when you do that and you fail, or at least fall short of advancing, I think that puts a microscope on the entire situation and brings out all the drama and all the infighting, and it puts a spotlight on everything. So I think they go hand in hand.
Yeah, it's just crazy to me that it is. I guess it's a chicken and egg type scenario, because now all of a sudden the pressure's heated up. When the Mavericks were tanking, or the Mavericks didn't have any expectations, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we can keep Rick for a while. Donnie Nelson, that trade didn't work out. That's fine. And now all of a sudden here we are. Man, did Reliably just start all this? It seems like all of a sudden you bring that guy in and everybody's making, including myself, the little finger memes. But it seems to be that's kind of what sparked all this, or what was the nail in the coffin for a couple of guys here. So, all right, coming up, we'll get into the book. There's a couple of cool things from the book that we want to talk about with Jake Fischer about the Mavericks preventing the Hawks from drafting Giannis. That is a fascinating story that I want to hear about. And then also some draft details about Kristaps Porzingis. We'll get into more of that coming up. But before we do, got to talk about rockauto.com. There's so many different places to get car parts right now. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it's impossible for your local chain store to have all the parts that you need. So why would you want to spend so much more time? Spend 30, 50, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership, where you can just get them at rockauto.com. For example, there's a Honda Odyssey fuel pump. You can get it for $353 from a chain store, or you can go to rockauto.com and get it for $216. You save all that money and you can buy things like Jake Fischer's book, or you can buy all kinds of other stuff. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box? So they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Also, want to tell you about betonline.ag. It's the fastest and easiest way to put down some money on sports. The Donnie Nelson news happened so fast, I don't think they had lines on who was going to get fired or which GM was going to get fired, but they have all kinds of random lines all the time. They have a couple special ones right now. They have a couple coach odds right now. Boston Celtics next head coach, Chauncey Billups, plus 500. Kara Lawson, plus 600. Ime Udoka, plus 700. Jason Kidd. How is Jason Kidd's name still in every single coaching search? Plus 800 for him. Sam Cassell, plus 800. Jamal Mosley from the Dallas Mavericks, plus 1,000 on that. If you want to put some odds down on that, go ahead and go to betonline.ag. Use the promo code LOCKEDON. Get a 50% welcome bonus to your first deposit at BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. All right, Isaac, we're back with Jake Fischer. Let's get into some of the details from the book. All right, walk me through this. So you pitched this to me. How Dallas prevented the Hawks from drafting Giannis. Just give it to me.
Well, in 2013, a lot of people had a beat on Giannis. I'd say most teams did. Philly sent some people there. Houston definitely was intrigued. But very few execs knew what to make out of that grainy footage of him playing in a middle school gym against short people, right? So Danny Ferry, the Hawks GM at the time, was very in on Giannis, though. He, I think, from all accounts, I talked to over 300 people for this book, players, agents, coaches, executives.
Man.
Got a pretty good pulse on the situation. And I got a ton of original reporting and details like this that's all throughout it. So if you find this story interesting, there's a hell of a lot more inside. But Danny Ferry did everything he could to draft Giannis and make him an Atlanta Hawk. They had the 17th and 18th picks in 2013, and he thought that'd be enough ammo. He packaged those 2 picks up. They could probably trade up into the early teens and get Giannis. So, they were all in with his agency, and they were trying to shut him down. They couldn't do that. But Danny Ferry did manage. The Hawks were the only team to host Giannis pre-draft. It was secret, though. They didn't want any team out there to know. They didn't even put him up in a hotel. They had Giannis stay at Danny Ferry's house with his brother Thanasis.
Oh, come on.
They had dinner at the kitchen table. They had Italian food takeout with Danny Ferry's wife and his kids. And they brought him into Phillips Arena, and Giannis is crying tears of joy, oh my God, this could be my life.
Wow.
But Milwaukee wanted him at 15, of course. So the Mavs were trying everything, the Hawks were trying everything they could to trade up, and they just couldn't get any higher possibly than 13. But Dallas, they were being coy the whole time. They kept saying, we're not really too interested in trading this pick. But behind the scenes, what was actually happening was Dallas was trying to clear the books for 2014 to make that run at free agency the following summer for LeBron and Melo and that whole group. They didn't want to take on Atlanta's 17th and 18th picks, let alone just their 13th pick, and take on another guaranteed contract. They wanted to clear their books and make a big run in free agency. And the Hawks had no idea. They were trying and trying and trying to get him. And the Mavs just kept saying, we're not really too interested. We think we're going to make this pick. So when the Mavericks do select Kelly Olynyk just to trade him to Dallas, the Hawks were absolutely devastated. You could hear a pin drop in that war room. Someone told me who was in that war room that a lot of people had difficulty moving on with the draft from that point. They thought they had Giannis falling to them and he is off the board. They were distraught. It's all because Dallas wanted to swing that deal for Kelly Olynyk and to get off that pick and not, have guaranteed money on their books that the Hawks weren't able to trade up, and Giannis was not in Atlanta.
And I'm looking at the draft right now. So Kelly Olynyk goes 13 to Dallas. You have Shabazz Muhammad go 14 to the Jazz, and then Milwaukee picks Giannis at 15. Nogueira goes to Boston at 16. Then it's Dennis Schroeder at 17. That's not a bad pick. And then 18 was the Shane Larkin pick, and we know how that ended up in Dallas too. So interesting, fascinating that the Mavericks just sort of played the Hawks there.
Well, it ended up kind of becoming like a 3-team deal where Bebe goes back to Atlanta and Shane goes to Dallas. Yeah, that's credit to Donnie Nelson and the stuff he came to be known for over his tenure there. Some shrewd negotiating. Obviously, when they moved up to get Luka, that's the kind of stuff that Donnie was known to do on the draft night.
That story makes me feel worse than it did that would have 2 days ago. I think about the Mavericks.
And it's stories like this in your book that I think is so fun for fans. to know about, because even in the summary of your book, it says you reported in hundreds of interviews with top players, coaches, and executives. You chronicle secret pre-draft workouts, feuding between player agents and executives, surprising trade negotiations, interpersonal conflicts, organizational power struggles, everything in a book like this.
Are you talking about the Mavericks last week? Or are you talking about all those things apply to this team?
I think Jake could just write a book on today, and just today. This is Jake's his next book that's coming out. But let me ask you a broad question about your book. What surprised you the most when writing this story? Was there something that, whether it's a specific story or a broader concept, what surprised you the most when putting this book together?
I think working on this, I wanted to compare and contrast a lot of different teams. Like Philly is the poster child for tanking, right? But Rob Hennigan was in Orlando and trading Dwight Howard away, and Ryan McDonough was trying to do the same rebuild in Phoenix until they ended up surprisingly winning 48 games. And Boston, they move on from KG and Paul Pierce that very night, 2013 in the draft, the same night that Sam Hinkie traded Drew Holiday. So all these analytical-minded executives were trying to, punt a couple of years and really value that 2014 class that was considered to be the best class since 2003. And who was running the league at that time but Miami, that had 3 guys from that top 5 in that 03 class. So I think what I've learned from this reporting the most, and we're seeing it still carry out today, is that the league has transitioned into a star hunting game. And the other aspect of that is that these players have as much agency as ever. And executives are so fully aware of how their team building is being evaluated on Twitter. And, I think social media has streamlined the conversation to the point where the NBA is just churning at this narrative cycle where, everyone involved is trying to do what they can to paint it in their favor. That's why we see Mark Cuban quote tweet Tim's articles saying total bullshit. Like, he was quoted in the article. So, it's all about the story and the narrative and the headline. And, I think that is ultimately the thing I've always learned. I've always been learning throughout my career is that the NBA is very little about the actual basketball. There's so much more at play between outside of 48-0 on the clock. So that lesson, I think, really gets pinpointed home in the story as you see agents, starting to steer their clients away from certain teams during the draft, and coaches and front offices disagreeing. The Palace intrigue within the Kings I cover in the book is absolutely bonkers. Like, at a certain point, like, winning a championship is so hard, and a lot of teams don't make it any easier by all the craziness that goes on inside them in the pursuit of that championship.
And that's why you have podcasts like this one, to break it all down and figure out whose narrative is what. That's exactly why. Last thing here, you mentioned KP draft details. So a couple things about Kristaps Porzingis getting drafted. Let's take me back to that 2015 draft and Kristaps Porzingis going 4, Phil Jackson, all that. I have to go way back if you're going to start talking about that.
Well, just like we mentioned, agents and feuding with executives. Sam Hinkie was really intrigued by Kristaps Porzingis. I don't think they definitely were going to take him, but he was someone that front office had a lot of interest in. But Andy Miller was Kristaps' agent at the time, who's now representing Chauncey Billups and Tyronn Lue and Nick Nurse and all these coaches. He also represented Nerlens and knew that situation was pretty tenuous and didn't go so hot in this whole losing environment, plus stacking a bunch of your players who kind of play the same position wasn't of interest to Andy Miller. And Kristaps wanted to be in New York as well. So when they had their pre-draft workout, their pro day, if you will, at Impact in Las Vegas, ASM, Andy's agency, they refused to let Hinkie even talk to Porzingis. And they tried to book him for a workout, and they always said no. There's one time that Andy allowed Sam to schedule a meeting with Porzingis in New York, but then he canceled it as Hinkie was on his way up there, saying that Porzingis had food poisoning. And I talked to KP. It was I believe January of 2020, like right before either that or February, like right before the pandemic, and it was in New Orleans on the road, and he had his feet in an ice bucket. He was sitting in his locker, and he was just candid, like, my people just wanted me to go to New York, and I did too. So I didn't really have any complaints. I just did what they told me to do. So
did he eat something bad on purpose to get food poisoning, or are you calling him a liar?
I think Andy Miller was flipping.
Was he eating pizza in Utah or?
Exactly. So, I mean, they had the promise from Phil Jackson from pretty early in the get-go. Orlando really wanted him at 5 too, and they were hoping KP would stay in the draft in 2014. They wanted to take him at number 12, but he pulled out thinking he could rise up the 2015 rankings, and sure enough, he did, and he went 4. And it was even after everything that they did and Andy Miller did, there was still a fear that Philly could have taken him at 3 and called their bluff anyway. But Andy Miller and Kristaps won in the end, and obviously he engineered his way to New York, which turned him into the all-star that Dallas wanted to trade for, that he is currently not playing like. So.
Oh, he had to end it like that. The parting shot.
Just went for the heart.
By the way, I'm looking back at that draft. Towns goes number 1. D'Angelo Russell number 2. They're on the same team now. Jahlil Okafor went 3 to the Sixers. If everybody remembers that. That one went not well. Porzingis to the Knicks. Mario Hezonja to the Magic at 5. Willie Cauley-Stein, 6 to Sacramento. Emmanuel Mudiay. Where's that guy? Pick 7 to the Nuggets. Stanley Johnson to Detroit. Frank Kaminsky, that pick that was they were going to trade to Miami. Justice Winslow to Miami. Miles Turner, Indiana. Devin Booker to the Suns at 13. That draft is all over the place, which a lot of them are, but that one is insane.
And listen, Devin Booker told me on the record in the book, the Jazz wanted him at 12, and he refused to go work out for Utah. It was the only team he refused to not work out for, and he told me, it's Utah. I don't really think that jive with my lifestyle. So
can't wait for those conference finals.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you want us to get you booked on Locked On Jazz next to tell that story?
Let's do it. I'm down. I'm down to talk about anybody and talk to anyone about this book.
There you go. Jake Fischer. Again, the book is Built to Lose: How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. Go check it out. Go Google it. Just go to Jake's Twitter. We'll put a link in the description of this podcast. Thanks so much for listening to Locked On Mavs.
So,
boom.